Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Major Josh Powers. I run a site that is called the Field Grade Leader, and I'm here today streaming in from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. We've got a group of guys here, CGSC students. We're here to talk just a little bit about leadership and what it takes to be successful as an S3 or an XO. We've got a special guest today as well. Sitting next to me is Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Krantz. He is a student here at the pre-command course and preparing to go take command of an organization out at starting at Fort Carson and then onward to Europe. So we're glad to have you here. And so really the intention of this dialogue is to talk a little bit about leadership in general, to talk about being an S3, being an XO, and to talk about some of the things that I post on my site. And that's really my expertise in my wheelhouse, and what I hope to share is the organizational leadership perspective. What we're lucky to have from Colonel Krantz that I couldn't provide last time for a guy that's going in very, very shortly to command a battalion is that insight from a future leader of what he sees, what he thinks from the battalion leader level perspective, and what he is going to ask from you when he's your boss here in the next couple months. So we're just going to do open questions. I'm going to try to monitor for the guys that are watching online as well, and to try to keep some of your questions in. So if you've got them, just put them down in the comments. And really, we're prepared to talk about anything. So just one note, although we're in uniform, this is an informal function. What we say in the room does not represent in the opinion of the United States Army, the Department of Defense, or the government. It's just an informal leadership session here at Fort Leavenworth. So with that, we're going to go to whoever has the first question, whoever wants to lead out, or whoever is the bravest.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, man.
Sir, my first question is on training management, because I've heard that you love training management, sir. Sir, assuming that the sustainable readiness model is going to cause a constant background noise during training for units now, since there won't be a dump in officers and a refill, do you have any TTPs, or what's the best way to maintain continuity of training progression? What I mean is, how do you combat the background noise of officers leaving and NCOs leaving and soldiers leaving, with not having to go back and continue to retouch training events you've already done, recertifying crews, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great one. Terrat, you want me to lead in and you go? Or you
Either way, here's my perspective. The sustainable readiness model, if done correctly, means that you're going to, after a period of time, you're going to be at a level of proficiency, and then it's just a management of, for an armor battalion or a cavalry squadron or a combined arms battalion, a crew roster management, trying to maintain accountability and cohesiveness within those crews for as long as possible. And then the management as an S3 in particular, at the squadron, at the battalion, at the brigade, at the regimental level, making sure that you program appropriately as per your METs require, those external evaluations that maintain a proficiency at a high level over time. And that is both hard and easy to do. The hard part of it is having the foresight to go out and actually do training management in such a way that you have visibility on what's going to happen 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks out. And I will tell you from a former squadron and regimental S3 perspective, your training, your annual training guidance and your quarterly training guidance pay huge dividends when you're putting together training schedules. And I would say of all of the things as a 3 in particular that you hold sacred and that you publish on time, those have to be them. And if Hire doesn't publish them, publish it anyway, give it to them, and give them something to work off of to write their own, because they'll eventually catch up. But if you're a squadron or a battalion and you're talking to the brigade or regimental 3, and you kind of sense this thing's not going to come out, or there's not even a draft, write it, and then publish it, and give them yours. And then make sure that your battalion commander, your squadron commander know that you did that, because that's probably going to precipitate a conversation between them and the higher commander. I never saw, from my perspective, an issue. I only had to do that once, and Reginald 3 and I had talked, and we were kind of working on ours together. I got like a week ahead of him, but we had talked enough about what it was we were going to both put out that we can kind of do parallel planning, which is kind of it's connected to this, and it's a lead into it. Probably the most important point. If you don't walk away from CGSC with any other idea, if you don't walk away from this little LPD with any other idea, remember this: up until this point, you've been kind of graded about how good you are or the organization you're in is. It's paid to be competitive. It's paid to be hyper competitive and to kind of go out and be the best leader that you could be, and make your organization look like it shines. You're no longer graded about how good you are. You're graded more than anything else, and General Abrams made this point today to all the incoming battalion squadron commanders. You're now graded on how good a teammate you are. Now for the people in our organization as a cavalry squadron, you enable other maneuver units and supporting units to be able to do their job. We know as 410 Cav, we'll never be the main effort for 3rd Brigade Combat Team 4th ID. But we darn well know that our job and how well we do our job enables 168 and 1-8 Infantry and 166 Armor and everybody else in 3rd Brigade Combat Team to be successful. We have to be good teammates in order to make the collective team successful and ourselves successful. And no matter what kind of organization you're going to, you've got to take that approach. It doesn't matter if you're a sustainer or a maneuver person, or a combat support or combat service support officer, or NCO for that matter. Your job is to make the collective team better. And the more you embrace that, particularly as you transition from company grade officer to field grade officer and become a S3 or an XO, the greater your organization is going to be. And that's going to be your hallmark of success. And that's going to be what people remember about you.
So I'm going to echo that point because I think it's exceptional. And again, so it's not about how good your organization is. Your battalion, your squadron, that's not the point. It's about how good your team is and how good you are as a team player. And one of the things that I think we've talked about before and that I talk about a lot is your ability to be a part of the team inside of the brigade, and then eventually with you guys inside of the division, between the 3s, between the XOs, so that you can understand what your priorities are. You can understand your boss's priorities, you understand his boss's priorities, and you can tap into those. So back to the original, back to sustainable readiness model. The key that I saw, and I was Brigade S3 kind of right at the beginning of getting that out and getting that into the fight. When you guys go to the field, you have to be ready to train. Too many times do we see units that go out, they get all the conditions set, they're ready to go out in the field, they're green, they're ready to train, but they haven't done the preparatory training to actually execute their collective training. So you have to make sure that you're setting those conditions and that your subordinate units are using the 8-step training model effectively to go out and get after their training. And you do that through the things that the boss just talked about. You do that through your dialogue with your subordinate units at the QTB, with your annual training guidance, with your quarterly training guidance. That's how you have that dialogue, and you set a battle rhythm, a long-term battle rhythm, a long-term, well-communicated plan with those subordinate units. Another one that is absolutely essential is you have to have a tasking cycle inside of your organization. That's one of the first questions that I would recommend you guys ask when you get in. If you're an S3, or if you get in and you're not a 3 or an XO, what is the tasking cycle, the RAG cycle, red, amber, green? So if you're not providing that level of predictability and you're just arbitrarily tasking companies without any rhyme or reason, you're not setting those guys up to have the conditions to go out and execute collective training. And then the last note that I'll give you, and it ties into both of those. So your time to go out and train and do that collective training that I talked about towards the beginning is very, very small. You're going to see at the squadron or the battalion level the grind of day-to-day ops in a home station environment are very, very taxing on your organization. So when you are green, when you're the battalion that's the brigade green, and you're, you know, the green brigade in the division, and it's your time to train, you've got to be ready to train, and you've got to be able to do it multi-echelon. Your talk is set up. Your talk is talking to someone else. The company CPs are established. They're talking to you. Your mission command systems are up. You're running through digital call for fire. You're running your analog systems, and you're doing all of those things simultaneously, because if you don't do those during those small collective training windows, you're going to do them the one time you go to the field before you go to a CTC, and then it's not quite as smooth. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, man. What else?
So, sir, you briefly touched on it. This may just be a lack of exposure on my part to training guidance. And this is a little bit of an open-ended question, so it may be kind of hard to answer. But what are some TTPs, or what are some key pieces of training guidance that you've seen as making a good product, or that has helped communicate the plan down to the battalion?
Everybody's going to gravitate to their tactical tasks and their metal tasks. You've got to think well outside of that. You got to think 350-1 requirements. You got to think about soldier readiness. You got to think about services for vehicles and equipment. You've got to think about SRP. You've got to, you know, the whole name of the game, and everybody has heard General Milley say it, and he's absolutely right. Readiness is our #1 priority, and there is no other #1. If you can construct training guidance that enhances your readiness, I can't see how you're failing. You've got to be able to articulate in all of those little commodity areas, those areas that contribute towards the readiness of your organization. You know, whether that is vehicle maintenance, whether that is ancillary equipment maintenance, whether that is leader development, whether that is developing mastery within your tactical tasks, whether through training, whether through education, whether through the experience of a CTC or local training area event. You know, and then all of those other things that we have to do, the 350-1 requirements, those things that Army regulations requires us to be trained in, to be competent in. You got to account for all of that, and you've got to be able to sequence properly how it is you're going to construct on the calendar with all of the different requirements that come in, how you're going to accomplish all of those things. And that's a dialogue that you've got to have with your commander, and that's a dialogue that you've got to have with the next higher operations officer. And then as peers, if you as the 3 and the XO can get together and figure out how you're going to tackle that animal together, because remember, you've got the tasking authority, he runs the staff, he or she runs the staff. You've got to have this symbiotic relationship between the two of you. And again, it goes back to that teamwork aspect that we talked about a little bit earlier. For me, the easiest way to construct training guidance was to frame it out in the training aspect, the maintenance aspect, the soldier issues aspect, you know, the pre-deployment readiness aspects. You know, for 11th ACR, we had prepared to deploy orders for one infantry company, one tank company, all the time while I was there, in addition to the OPFOR mission that we had. So to maintain a level of readiness, really for an American fleet and for the OPFOR surrogate fleet altogether, you know, the dialogue that I had to have with the XO in order to make sure that we had programmed that out, outside and inside of rotations, was pretty extensive and absolutely necessary, or we weren't going to accomplish the squadron commander or the regimental commander or the NTC commander's intent. Does that help answer your question? Does it make sense?
I'm going to pile on a couple more on top of that, and I agree. So the relationship with the XO, so utterly important when it comes to how you're building training management. So when you build your training management, the annual training guidance, you know, is a little bit more conceptual. It's talking some broad stroke some broad stroke type stuff. But when you're a battalion S3 and you're doing your quarterly training guidance, like that's where the rubber meets the road, and where you really transition that broad concept into something that's executable. And so when you do that, what it should look like is something that we use in MDMP that's called CODEB and Wargaming when you go through. And when you are wargaming how your quarter looks, how those 12 weeks fall, I have a very light infantry mentality, and I love to go out and walk in the woods, and it's really awesome. The first thing that goes onto the calendar when I do it, or when I did it as a Brigade S3, services, because services for your vehicles do not move. It doesn't matter. And so that is something that that takes your staff being present. So your maintenance officer has to be there to be that person that's really getting your services locked in, or the SPO if you're at the brigade level, depending. The next thing that goes on is your tasking cycle, your red, amber, green cycle at the brigade level that dictates when you're red and amber as a battalion, and then subsequently how you're going to knock that down to the company so you can task them out as well. But then the next piece that we always miss out on, so if it's just me as the 3 in there and I've got my AS3 and my officer major, like we can figure that out pretty easily. We grab the XO and the maintenance guys, and we can figure out the services. But then if you publish, which battalions and squadrons do quite often with just those things on it, then we run into fighting fires. So the S4 comes up a couple days later, and they're like, hey, we've got this massive equipment transition, we've got a property book thing. The S1 comes in, hey, we're late for getting in, this personnel readiness stat, we need to pull everyone. The S2 comes in, we've got to go through and we've got to do all our AT level training, whatever. So pulling in the staff, and that's why you're a partner with the XO and you guys are in this together, you go through and you identify those points as best you can when you're doing your quarterly training guidance so you can get ahead of it. The next thing that I'll give you in your training guidance is establishing either there or in a subsequent document that I've often called, and I think it's pretty common, the terms of reference in regards to your red, amber, and green training, right? So when you're red, for example, in my brigade, what we anticipated you were doing was 350-1 and individual level training, appointments, like you're knocking out all of those things very heavily. Amber is individual training tasks, individual rifle ranges, you're getting after those things and targets of opportunity, and then green is collective training windows. So that will help, along with priorities from the battalion or squadron commander saying, hey, focus on these 350-1 tasks, focus on these home station tasks, focus on these pieces of your medal or your key collective tasks, and that's how you build effective training guides. And one more piece on that. So the division looks out, they're looking somewhere around 12 to 18 months out. That's generally where their time window is going to be. Your brigade is looking generally 12 plus. They've got a very conceptual calendar, but where they're really making their money is 6 to 12, right? So that's where they're really building guidance, and they're handing that as it comes into you, into your fight, and then you're getting in and you're getting inside of that quarter, and then your companies are fighting somewhere in T+8, man, is when they're really getting into the meat, right? Something like that. So what doesn't go inside of that cycle, short suspense fragos, you'll never get away from those, and that's why you've got your guys that are red that you've got on hold that you can task out. The other thing that doesn't fall inside of that is land and ammo. Does not fall within that cycle. Your land cycle and your ammo cycle are different. And I don't know why, and I've never been able to figure it out. So my recommendation to you guys is banging out fragos to your quarterly training guidance every month that help resync when your subordinate units are required to give you information in regards to land and ammo, and then when that cycle kind of goes back through, because it is not in line with your quarterly training guidance, it's not in line with the normal type things. And then that'll crosswalk its way all the way down into your weekly training meetings. Does that make sense? It just doesn't sync. And I screwed it up enough times as a battalion S3 and got beat up by my boss, and I figured it out eventually. All right, what else? You got one? Josh?
Well, what I was going to ask, you gentlemen have been helping me sort of understand the way that we visualize this, whether it's sort of having lines of effort for training guidance, or just the various ways that we can ensure that everyone's becoming, synced in time and space. But what I've sort of started to wonder is how objective team requirements might have driven us towards a greater degree of centralization, and I'm wondering what it is you gentlemen have seen as means by which to give greater initiative to the sporting units, so that everyone's not necessarily on the rat race of keeping records and not being able to train in the manner they might want to do otherwise.
There's only so many things and so many tasks and I'll speak from a cavalry from squadron perspective. I gotta be able to do route recon, area recon, zone reconnaissance. Gotta be able to screen, and if I get augmentation, I gotta be able to guard. And if the brigade gets the mission with appropriate augmentation, I have to accommodate and help foster a cover. I've got those other things that I've got to do. Everybody's got to do RSOI. They've got to be prepared to deploy. They've got to be able to recover from the field. But there's not too many, tactically, there are not too many things that I have to do. You know, the list of the essential tasks for a CAV squadron, relatively limited in scope. Same goes for a combined arms battalion. Same goes for an infantry battalion and an IBCT. Same goes for a striker infantry battalion in an SBCT. There's only about 6 big things, big ticket items that you've got to be able to do at the squadron, battalion, brigade level. If you could tie everything that you've got to do, and remember that's what you're graded against when it comes down to USR and the sustainable readiness model. So everything you've got to be able to do, you got to contribute to those 5 or 6 things that are essential to you. The balancing of all of the other stuff that comes in. And I know there were 2 questions on the Facebook page, one about battle rhythm, we'll get to that in a few minutes, and the other one about needs and wants, and how do you balance the needs and wants if you've got a confliction within your organization that you've got these needs and wants for a training event, but higher is imposing needs and wants for a training event, and sometimes there's a confliction. Here's what our responsibility, particularly as operations officers, is. You've got to be able to take a look at the cost-benefit analysis of either way. You've got to be able to weigh the risks and assess the risks relatively quickly, and you've got to articulate what those risks are to somebody who makes the decision. Now, sometimes as an S3, you're the one empowered to make that decision. I think, at least in a perfect world, and Drew Marsh, I hope you're listening to this if you're not asleep and wherever you are right now. I shouldn't have to make too many decisions as the commander. The S3 and the XO should be empowered and enabled to make a lot of those decisions themselves. And hopefully you work for a commander that allows you to do that too. At the end of the day, you know, and I know you guys talk a lot about mission command philosophy while you're here, and there's a lot of people that are questioning what exactly is mission command philosophy and why do we supplant command and control with mission command. You guys have had numerous theoretical and philosophical conversations on how command and control is still present within mission command, and I'm not going to believe that. But remember, you don't have to be a commander to understand, visualize, describe, direct, lead, and assess. And I would say your powers of being able to do that as an S3 or an XO are even more evident, because everything you do is to enable your commander to realize their vision and their intent in your ability to articulate how you understand, how you visualize, how you describe through mission orders, then how do you direct as a staff, how do you lead people through the process, and then how do you continually assess that, both through the planning and the execution phase and the post-execution phase, as you get ready to do the same thing over and over again. I don't know that I quite understand why people are worried about the sustainable readiness model. I just don't, because if it works the way it could work, and a lot of it is dependent upon variables outside of your control. If you're not a T1 because you don't have the right people, and you're the XO and you're getting ready to write USR, then you got to be able to articulate, we have done everything within the powers of the brigade, or the battalion, or the squadron to man all of these different positions, and these are the shortages we have, and you know, you can't pick and choose who it is you get in. If you've got training deficiencies due to equipment that's down, equipment that's missing, equipment that you just don't have, you've got to be able to articulate that. You know, those are 2 acceptable answers for not being T1, or not having the right personnel. Because remember, you got to be 90% or above on leaders. You got to have a night evaluation. You got to be externally evaluated in order to be T1. You know, those are acceptable. They're more maybe not acceptable. They're more palatable reasons and they're outside of your control. You've done everything you can up to the point with the personnel you have, the equipment you have, and the training time allotted. What's going to be more difficult to do is, yeah, we've had 90% of our leaders at this training event. We've got all the equipment, but we elected not to go after that particular task that happens to be part of our medal tasks when we were in the field and afforded time. That's kind of an unforgivable sin. And that is preventable, I think. Particularly as you scope out and you look forward and you look at all the training time you have, and understanding that there are impingements upon your training time because you can't arbitrarily assess yourself T1, but you have to be externally evaluated. Well, remember, your sister or brother battalion to your left or right has the same imposition upon them. So when they're not evaluating you, you're probably going to be evaluating them, and that has an effect and a spin-out effect upon your training time. If you so choose to allow to observe it from that perspective, or you can use that time and say, you know what, this is training for my leaders that are out there that are providing this observer coach trainer function for the sister battalion, and you can drive that into an assessment phase as well, or at least a betterment phase for those leaders that you've gotten tasked over to that sister unit. There's a ton of inventive ways of making people better, which I think at the end of the day, if you're going to go into the non-doctrinal definition of what an operations officer does, the operations officer exists to make everyone in that organization better in everything they do, and be the Pied Piper that explains to everybody that every single thing they do is a training event that should be geared somehow towards their warfighting core competencies. And if you can do that, which really you should be able to do with just about anything, applying the 8-step training model, which always ends in an AAR, which should be disseminated horizontally and vertically so that people don't make the same mistakes, or they repeat the good practices in all training events, or all events for that matter, then I think you're doing your job as an operations officer. I think you're fulfilling what your function is to the commander and the command for which you're working.
No, I agree. So I'm going to transition to a couple questions that are popping in online. Number one, we got a shout out from Keith Benedict. He's a former Brigade S3 of 1-2 SBCT, talking about that coordination and collaboration between the threes and the battalion and brigade level. Thanks, Keith. Next, so Blair Downey shot a note online, wanted to know about personal battle rhythm as a field grade officer, which was one of my favorite topics. I'm not going to go into the full battle rhythm. Maybe I'll write an article and post that one about battalion or brigade level kind of keys to success from what I've seen on a battle rhythm. But I will talk personal. And this kind of nests with one of the other questions that we received beforehand from Captain Clark out at 3rd ID. He asked about the biggest challenges that I saw as a field grade leader, and they go together. The biggest challenge I saw as a field grade leader, as a 3 at the battalion and brigade level, as an XO at the battalion level, was that everything is on fire all the time. And the things that are on fire all the time are always in between you and what you know that you need to do. So all the things that we just talked about, creating multi-echelon training, creating good guidance, what we talked about last week, doing good MDMP and get the staff trained up, those are priorities. Your boss is telling you to do those. He's lining them out. You're making sure it makes sense. You're making sure it's nested. But in between you and that is your inbox that's always on fire. It's the Brigade S3 calling because you missed a short suspense task. It is the Ops Sergeant Major calling because Alpha Company didn't send anybody for the detail. It's the Chow Hall calling because your car is double parked. There's always something that's on fire. So for me, for personal battle rhythm, the way that I solved that is that I knew that the times that I could do work and actually get in and go through and figure out what was going on and triage my inbox and to go through and do the work that I needed to do were early in the morning and late at night. That's when I could do work, and those were my time blocks. And I talked about this online once already. I got trolled, so I'm probably going to get trolled again for having for no balance, but I'm sorry. So I would get into the office very, very early, and I would go through and try to do my morning routine every morning, kind of absent of external distractions when nobody was there. I'd go through my notes and I'd pull everything out of my notebook that was something that had to be accomplished by someone, which I always marked in the same way, and I'd get those lined up in a task tracker. I'd check the task tracker and I'd see what was due, what needed to be checked, what needed to get out, what was complete, what I needed to tell the boss. I'd scrub the calendars. I'd pull up the brigade, battalion calendar, division calendar, whatever. I'd line them up and I'd make sure that the calendar was straight. And then once I got both of those things accomplished and I made sure I was good, then I prioritized the work that I had to do. What had my boss told me to do personally, what things that I need to check that an AS3 or a subordinate had put together, and to get through those things before the day started and things started to implode on site. So that's kind of how I ran my battle rhythm, and it was a long 2 years, but that's what allowed me to be successful. One of the biggest mistakes that I see with, or one of the biggest challenges that I see with guys coming out of company command time, going to ILE and going out into the force, is that we think we can go into an organization and we can do everything. If you're a company commander, you can pretty much do everything. Everything that comes into your inbox, somebody tells you to do, like, you can figure it out, you grab your PLs and you can muscle it and make it happen. As an S3, that is not possible. So you have to be comfortable you taking information in, getting it processed through your head, giving guidance to someone and allowing them to do work, and enabling them to think and to act and to learn as they go. And that's really tough. It's hard to let go of that control. So that's kind of a key. The other mistake is guys, or thing that's problematic is guys leaving it in their notebooks. So they're going to all these meetings, they're pulling in all these tasks, and then they're just stuck there. They can't ever get unburied. So you have to be efficient in whatever method you use to get those things out of your notebook and into someone else's hands for action. So I'm an iPad guy. I'm a digital guy. That's how I work. I don't use paper if I don't have to, and that's effective for me. It's not effective for everybody, but it's just a system. Is there any thoughts on personal timeline?
So at the NTC, and being in the OP4, my timeline was basically dictated to me. I mean, a rotational schedule was released 18 months in advance, and you knew down to the hour pretty much what was going to happen. And that was both easy and challenging for putting together training plans at the troop company battery level. And for me personally as an S3, it was both easy and quite difficult to maintain that for 23 NTC rotations in a row over a 2-year time period. But the flip side is I knew where I was going to be just about every day of the rotation, or at least what was going to be required of me by time. And by knowing that, I knew that the combined arms rehearsal for the first battle period had to be done at RSOI 3, that we were going to roll out our scouts RSOI 4, that the main body was going to roll out RSOI 5, the training day 1. We started sticks up until training day 7, or training day 6 when we transitioned to prep for the force on force. I knew that I always had about 3 squads up in live fire, at least when we were doing mission rehearsal exercises, and as we transitioned to the decisive action rotations, that our burden for, at that time we were still doing company sticks at NTC, that our burden for troops and batteries and companies was going to be a little bit more increased south of the live fire line. And obviously that evolved over time, and it continues to evolve at the NTC. And as battalion and brigade level live fires have become more feasible for our brigade combat teams going through the training centers, a lot of those requirements for 11th ACR and Ops Group at NTC in particular have changed. So I can't comment as to what it is now, but I can comment on what it was from 2011 to 2013. In that my timeline was relatively predictable in terms of what it was from month to month, but within those training days, with a free thinking OP4, we never fought the same way. So the whole requirement for conducting mission, military decision-making process, for making sure that IPB is followed, regardless of whether we live there. The assistant S3s, the S2 shop, and everybody else quickly learned that the regimental commander, the squadron commanders, the XOs, and the S3s did not accept the answer of, well, we'll just do it the way we did it last time. Because we were disadvantaging the brigade combat team we were fighting against if we were going to do that. Even more so, we were disadvantaging the soldiers within the formation because we were just making everything cookie cutter at that point. And if we're going to portray a free-thinking Op4 to provide this, call it what you want, this hybrid threat, this new generation warfare threat to all the brigade combat teams within the Army, then you couldn't just do the same thing every single time, because that's not free thinking, it's robotic. So while the days were predictable, what happened within the days was relatively fluid, and a lot of times it depended upon what the unit was throwing at us.
Mark, what else you got? Questions?
So I know that you're always trying to really move towards using MDMP to conduct your LRC or your staff, your long-range planning, and it seems like a great system. I've seen some really good planning exercises to do training management, training planning. But just ask your kind of practical advice on how you incorporate MDMP into the training management process, and then how maybe what worked well, what didn't work well, et cetera.
Yeah, so I think a couple things. So you've got to be able to use the MDMP and use that language and those tools that the Army's given you. If for no other reason, then you're going to use it when you go into the fight or when you go to a CTC. Like you're going to use it. So if you're not gaining repetitions and you're using another methodology to plan your training infrastructure, then you're not necessarily being the most efficient. Now that being said, there are some cases where you have the opportunity to kind of shut down the battalion or the brigade staff and work your way through MDMP, and there are some times that you can't do it. So you got to be smart on that and kind of make that work. A method that we used is for anything that was at our level collective training. So at the battalion level, your collective training is platoon level training, right? And at the brigade level, it's company level training and kind of battalion level sticks and brigade CPXs and those kind of things. We would shut down the staff and we'd execute MDMP for those events as best we could. We'd isolate our folks and go out and get after it. And that was a great tool and a great methodology to learn through. Now we still ran our way through numerous iterations of MDMP in simulations, various scenarios out in the field, so we continued that as well. Now, kind of on the flip side, when we were doing things that weren't necessarily prime collective training, we still talked about those events in the vernacular of MDMP. So when we had a staff sync or a staff working group, they would run through the wickets of MDMP. We do mission analysis. We talk through what we thought as a staff were some of the key considerations, the facts, assumptions, all that kind of stuff. When we got into COEDEV, we talk about what the moving pieces were, and then we present each one of those to the commander, and the commander would give us feedback in a very similar fashion. But that would occur over weeks instead of over days. But using the efficiency of the MDMP and learning and growing as a staff kind of along the way. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So there, go ahead. This is it's kind of sort of different question, but we talked about QTB guidance, and the organization I came from was very big on, it was 3.5 month quarters or cycles. And so before you went into a deployment cycle, the next training cycle, which was about 7 months when you got back, was already planned. And the units that the gentlemen were part of, when you're doing the QTB planning, when you finish that QTB, when is the starting point of the execution of that? I'm trying to figure out, like, am I doing a QTB for something that's going to start 3 months from now? Am I doing it so I've already got 3 months already planned? Does that make sense?
QTB brief should be about 6 weeks before the beginning of the quarter.
6 weeks before the beginning.
You want to do it before your lock-in, right?
Right.
Well, you lock in at 6 weeks, right?
Yes.
So you'd have to have that training plan approved before you lock in. Otherwise, you're locking in for something that might not be approved by 2 levels up.
And that crosswalks into that, what I was talking about before with the monthly Frago deal, if that makes sense. So if you're doing a QTB, so you're during a QTB, I'm gonna use my most recent experience, you're talking through the next quarter in detail, and then there's a conceptual plan
Okay.
out to the following. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So you're getting next quarter approval, and then the following one is this broad concept, and you're having a dialogue in the broad concept. Those fragos, so as a brigade 3, as we're trying to pump those fragos through, that transition point between quarters gets at least a little bit less messy. Now the odd man out is land and ammo. So you were having this dialogue. I'm talking to the commander. I'm like, hey sir, this is what we're thinking. We want to do this and this and this. I don't know what range I'm using yet at that point, because the ranges are still outside of my lock-in period as I'm transitioning quarters. So you've got to be adaptive. You got to be flexible, and you're talking a lot of times conceptual on what the boss wants you to accomplish, and not where he wants you to accomplish it. If that makes sense. That's kind of how you work your way across those transitions. But as S3s and as XOs, man, that's your bread and butter, is fighting through transitions and making those work, because companies aren't doing that. They're fighting onto the objective, killing everything you tell them to kill, and then they're done and waiting for the next guidance. You're the transition guy, right?
A couple questions from off the page. Curtis Archuleta, my old battle buddy at MCO Doctrine, asked, how do you maintain doctrinal proficiency yourself and instill a hunger for doctrine within your subordinates? Number one, you got to read. And as doctrine is updated, you better be the first subject matter expert within your formation as a field grade officer within that formation. So you've got there's a number of mechanisms you can get on the mailing lists from TRADOC that sends out the updates. The S1net is probably one of the best battle command knowledge systems out there that will send an update on what those are as well. But at the end of the day, you've got to take the personal initiative and the professional initiative to read it yourself. Your doctrine is not that long anymore, and we haven't, we went from like 350 manuals down to 100 manuals, and the ADRPs and the ADPs are relatively short. It's good beach reading. Summer's coming up. It's time to get yourself invested in doctrine. But here's the other piece on that. Implement doctrine in everything you do. Everything that you do should be tailored as an operation. Well, operations are doctrinal. True or false?
True.
So it so follows, to go through the logical philosophical syllogism, that if everything is operational and doctrine guides operations, then doctrine should be infused in everything that you do, whether it's out in the field or whether it's in garrison. And if you do that, then this understanding and this mastery of doctrine will permeate itself throughout the organization that you're working in. A couple other questions just to speed through. How do you encourage camaraderie, personal and tactical development in a zero tolerance environment? You've got to make people, number one, understand and buy into the fact that it is fun to be good at your job, and that everything you do is to maintain a level of proficiency. There's a couple different things, and you could be touching a third rail real quick when we talk about zero tolerance. There are certain things that we should absolutely be zero tolerance about. Sharp infractions, hazing, whether we treat people with dignity and respect within their formations. If people don't treat people with dignity and respect for formations, I want to be part of a formation that treats that with zero tolerance. I don't want people that are going to treat other people like garbage within the formation. And I don't want hazers in my formation. And I don't want sharp infractors in my formation. But I do think that there's something very fun about what it is we do. The fact that we actually get paid to do some of the things that we get to do, that we voluntarily ran around in the woods with sticks when we were kids to do. Now we get to do it on a larger scale. And I hope you appreciate the little twinge of cynicism in that, because what it is we do is extremely serious, and people's lives are at stake, and definitely on the line. But when you think about it, what it is we get to do is pretty fun and pretty neat. And there's not many people on the planet that get to do what it is we get to do. And to be good at that is pretty special. And you can bring a lot of teams together in doing that. it's been said almost to the point of cliche that your job as a leader is to provide purpose, direction, and motivation for the organization to which you belong. And just because you're a staff officer does not preclude your responsibilities as a leader. And you really got to embrace that, particularly as you get to an S3 shop, and particularly as you get to an XO position. Your ability to foster an environment of teamwork, going back to the first thing we started out with, and the fact that everybody's in it together, and that by increasing the level of proficiency throughout all the members of that organization, you inherently make the organization better, and better organizations make it more enjoyable to be around. So I think that answers that question. The last question, at least that I picked up off, is the TTPs on MDMP, and whoever, if I get my iPad logged back in, Johnny asked, what are some of the practical time management TTPs with regards to energizing battle staffs and condensed planning timelines for future operations? You get a special black horse because you led with the lawns. The TTPs on MDMP, I will tell you this: you've got to be good at doing it right completely before you figure out where you can shortcut. In certain organizations, inherently, you understand that your MDMP cycle is going to be shorter than complete. As a cavalry squadron or troop, or even a combined arms battalion scout platoon, you understand that you're LD in about 102, which means that your understanding of your higher commander's problem set and the likely decision points they are going to make before you LD are even more important. More often than not, a cavalry organization in particular is going to have to conduct a directed COA because you're pushing the formation out right about the same time the brigade staff is figuring out COA development. So the commander's dialogue, the liaisons that you have within the brigade staff, the dialogue between the squadron S3 and the brigade S3, infinitely more important because you're already going to be executing as they're going through the wargaming process. But you've got to understand, by doing those deliberate MDMP processes that we all acknowledge can be ridiculously painful, they're ridiculously and necessarily painful because you have to understand where your efficiencies and your deficiencies are before you can start shortcutting little steps within it. And a lot of that depends upon the level of risk or the amount of risk your commander or your XO or your S3 are willing to accept as you go through that. I don't know if you want to add to that.
I'll just echo that, and most of you guys heard me say this last week when we sat down. I remember the first time I did MDMP with my brother Nick Mum, who just joined in a minute ago. As the Brigade 3 and the Brigade XO, we went to Thailand and we were doing a training exercise. And our brigade commander had the entire brigade staff out working through, and we were utterly slayed at MDMP. And we thought we knew what we were doing. So going back through to the basics and working it slow was essential. We got no-go to mission analysis a couple times, COA dev, but getting through not only so MDMP is not that hard. There's a book, it's right there, and you follow the steps of the book. But MDMP as a cohesive unit, as a team, is hard to learn, and you've got to work those nuanced steps. And then MDMP as a team providing a product to your boss to enable his vision is also hard because there are a lot of human factors involved there. So as a team on the brigade staff, we worked MDMP over and over and over and over again, and it was extremely painful. And that really is the question that was in there. How do you start to cut back on time and to work off pieces of time? It's about efficiency in your processes, and it's about building a relationship with your organization. And I'll tell you, by the end of it, we were pretty humming in our ability to turn pretty decent operations order. All right, gents, we're about at our time hack for the live feed, so we're going to shut it down here in a minute. If you will do that for me. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm going to leave this video up for everybody to check out. Sir, you got any closing comments?
No, this is a great opportunity. I hope it continues. I hope it diversifies itself. There was a comment on here, and I agree with it. Unless you're going to force people to be here, you get whoever shows up. But the diversification, more branches, both genders, different races, infinitely adds to the discussion. So good comment. I'm not sure what we could have done about it today. When you throw out an invitation the day before something happens, you get with whoever shows up. But point taken that as you gain perspective throughout your leadership development journey, to get as many different perspectives, particularly those that don't conform to your particular way of thinking, just makes you even better. Brian Lensmeyer, I answered your question, but you're probably in the best position on whether I was effective at that or not, since you were within the formation during the time period you asked the question, how did I manage CS and CSS units to support maneuver training while providing them appropriate time with their own internal collective training. To be candid and to give myself a grade, I was probably a B to B minus on that. And a lot of that had to do with, how we use the support squadron to support the rotation at the same time of having to maintain a level of proficiency within their own tasks. Sometimes we were better at that than others. And as long as the SPO, the 4, the 3, the XO, and particularly the support squadron commander were all on the same page, then we were probably leaning in the right direction. Whether we effectively use the time allotted, history will be the judge, and Brian, you definitely will be the judge of that. But I think we did as best we could with what we had at the time. But I think this is a great forum. I hope it continues. I feel lucky to have been able to be here this week. Keep doing this, please, because it's important for our force, and the force will only get better. The more professionals that are like-minded, that are all have this thirst for knowledge and thirst for collective and individual betterment, continue to get together and have these discussions. So thank you very much.
Okay, so again, I'll leave this up. If you want to check it out, share it with your friends who are going into to similar jobs. If there are any questions that you guys didn't ask, put them in the comments and I'll answer them. I'll either come back on and do another live feed, I'll write an article, or I'll keep it the conversation in the chat. And then just thanks a lot for coming out, and have a good one. Thanks.